I am Average Joe, a lover of all things barbecue. The sizzling of meat, the smell of smoke, the taste of perfectly grilled ribs, it's an art form that I take great pride in mastering. So when my friends Corbin and Smoke invited me over for a barbecue, I eagerly accepted. The day of the barbecue was a beautiful one. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and the air was filled with the sweet smell of barbecue smoke. As soon as I arrived, I noticed something odd about the grill. The coals were burning an otherworldly shade of red, and the meat was sizzling with an intensity I had never seen before. Corbin and Smoke were already at the grill, basting the ribs with a mysterious sauce that smelled like sulfur and ash. They didn't seem to notice anything unusual about the sizzling ribs, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the night wore on, our other friends arrived and we all sat down to eat. The first bite of the ribs was unlike anything I had ever tasted. The meat was juicy and tender, but there was a strange flavor that I couldn't quite place. It was almost as if the meat had been infused with something otherworldly. As we ate, strange things began to happen. Smoke's eyes began to glow with an unnatural light, and Corbin started muttering incoherently. I began to feel lightheaded and dizzy, and the world around me seemed to blur and warp. That's when I saw him, the devil himself, standing at the edge of the yard, watching us with a sly grin. I couldn't believe it. Had we unwittingly made a deal with the devil by eating those sizzling ribs? As the night wore on, the hallucinations intensified. We saw visions of demons and hellfire, and the smell of brimstone filled the air. It was as if we had been transported to another dimension, one that was ruled by the devil and his minions. Finally, as the sun began to rise, the hallucinations faded, and we were left with nothing but the memory of that otherworldly barbecue. We never spoke of it again, but I knew that the experience had changed me forever. From that day forward, I would never take the power of barbecue for granted, for I knew that there were darker forces at work in the world, waiting to be unleashed by the sizzle of the grill. After the strange experience at Corbin and Smoke's barbecue, I became obsessed with the idea of harnessing the power of barbecue for supernatural purposes. I began to experiment with different techniques and ingredients, searching for a way to tap into the otherworldly energy that I had experienced that fateful night. My quest led me to an old smoker that I had inherited from my grandfather. The smoker had been in our family for generations and was said to be haunted by the spirits of all the animals that had been smoked inside it over the years. But I was undeterred. I knew that if I could master the haunted smoker, I could unlock a new level of power in my barbecue. I spent weeks studying the smoker's history and experimenting with different recipes. I tried everything from ghost pepper rubs to sacrificial lamb marinades, but nothing seemed to work. The smoker remained stubbornly unyielding, and I began to wonder if I had bitten off more than I could chew. But then, one night, as I sat alone by the smoker, I heard a faint whisper in the air. It was the voice of my grandfather speaking to me from beyond the grave. He told me that the key to mastering the smoker was to embrace its haunted history, to tap into the spirits that had been trapped inside it for so many years. I took his advice to heart and began to experiment with more esoteric ingredients. I used black salt from the Dead Sea, forbidden herbs from the Amazon rainforest, and even a dash of dragon's blood from a rare mystical creature. And finally, after many long nights of trial and error, I achieved my breakthrough. The smoker began to hum with an otherworldly energy, and the meat that came out of it was infused with a power that was both terrifying and exhilarating. But the power came at a price. The spirits of the animals that had been smoked inside the smoker over the years began to haunt my dreams, whispering dark secrets and ominous warnings. I knew that I had tapped into something ancient and powerful, something that was beyond my comprehension, but I couldn't turn back now. The haunted smoker had become my obsession, and I was willing to do whatever it took to harness its power. I began to host elaborate barbecues, inviting friends and strangers alike to taste the fruits of my labor. And the response was always the same. They would take one bite of the meat and then stare at me with wide-eyed wonder, as if they had been transported to another dimension. They could sense the power that I had infused into the meat, and they were both entranced and terrified by it. As for me, I knew that I had crossed a line. The power of the haunted smoker was both intoxicating and dangerous, and I was playing with forces that I could not fully comprehend. But I couldn't stop now. I was hooked on the thrill of unlocking the secrets of the grill, and I knew that there was no turning back. I was hosting another barbecue, this time in my backyard. I had spent all day prepping the meat and getting the smoker ready, and I was excited to show off my latest creations. But as the sun began to set and my guests started to arrive, I noticed that something was off. There was a figure standing at the edge of my yard, watching us with a cold, calculating gaze. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a nearby tree. But as I stared harder, I realized that it was something far more sinister. The figure was tall and gaunt, with long limbs and a face that was obscured by shadows. It wore a black cloak that billowed in the breeze, and it seemed to be studying us with a keen interest. I tried to ignore it and focus on the party, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every time I glanced in its direction, the figure seemed to be getting closer, as if it was slowly inching its way towards us. And then, suddenly, it was standing at the edge of my patio, staring down at us with an intensity that was almost palpable. I could feel its eyes on me, probing me, trying to read my thoughts. "What the hell is that?" one of my guests muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just stay calm." But staying calm was easier said than done. The figure was now standing just a few feet away from us, its cloak rustling in the breeze. I could hear its breathing, slow and measured like the ticking of a clock. And then, suddenly, it spoke. Its voice was low and gravelly, like the sound of rocks grinding against each other. "I've come for the barbecue," it said, its words echoing through the still night air. I didn't know what to say. The figure seemed to be both threatening and polite at the same time, and I couldn't read its intentions. "You're welcome to stay," I said, trying to sound gracious. "But you're not invited. Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it walked towards the smoker, its cloak swirling behind it. It reached out a bony hand and ran its fingers over the meat, as if testing its texture. And then suddenly, it disappeared. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone, leaving only a faint trace of smoke in its wake. I was left standing there, staring at the empty space where the figure had been. My guests were staring at me, their faces pale and terrified. "What the hell was that?" one of them said, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my mind racing. "But I have a feeling that we're not done with it yet." The rest of the barbecue passed by without incident, but the memory of the strange figure lingered in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was going to happen, and I found myself watching the shadows for any sign of movement. As the night wore on, my guests began to leave, one by one, until only Corbin and I were left. We sat on the patio, nursing our drinks and talking about nothing in particular. But then something strange happened. The air around us grew colder, and the shadows seemed to deepen. I looked up and saw that the sky had turned an eerie shade of purple like the color of a bruise. "What the hell is going on?" Corbin said, his voice tinged with fear. "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing. "But we need to get out of here." As we stood up to leave, the ground began to shake. A deep, rumbling sound filled the air like the sound of thunder rolling across the sky. And then suddenly, a figure materialized out of thin air. It was the same figure that had visited us earlier, only now it was even more terrifying. Its eyes blazed with a red fire, and its cloak was tattered and torn like it had been through a war. Its skin was as black as the night, and its teeth glinted in the dim light. "I have come to collect my due," it said, its voice like the sound of gravel crunching underfoot. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You made a deal with me," it said, its eyes boring into mine. "You offered me your barbecue in exchange for something you desired, and now it is time to pay up." I didn't know what to say. I had no memory of making any such deal, but the figure seemed to know everything about me. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent shivers down my spine. "I want your soul," it said. in exchange for the most delicious barbecue you have ever tasted. I was stunned. I had never believed in the devil or in any kind of supernatural being. But now, faced with this terrifying figure, I didn't know what to do. And then suddenly Corbin spoke up. "I'll make the deal," he said, his voice calm and steady. I turned to him, stunned. I had known Corbin for years, but I had never heard him speak like this before. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I want the barbecue," he said. "I'll give the devil my soul in exchange." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to object, to tell Corbin that he was making a terrible mistake, but something in his eyes told me that he had already made up his mind. And so I watched as Corbin made the deal with the devil. I watched as he gave up his soul in exchange for the most delicious barbecue he had ever tasted. And then, suddenly, the figure disappeared, leaving only the faint scent of smoke behind. I turned to Corbin, my heart heavy with grief. "Why did you do that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Corbin smiled, a smile that was both sad and triumphant. "I did it for the barbecue," he said, before disappearing into the night. Hey there, everyone. As we come to the end of this spine-tingling barbecue horror story, I just wanted to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for tuning in and listening to my tale. Your support and attention mean a lot to me, and I'm glad that I could share this story with all of you. I hope it left you feeling a bit scared and on edge, but also entertained and engaged. I also want to remind you all to be careful and aware of your surroundings, even in places that you might consider safe and familiar. You never know what could be lurking just around the corner. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll join me for more spooky stories in the future. Your host, Average Joe.